Yes, so the title of the exhibition is Growth Edge, and that comes from a psychology term that I learned recently from a friend who is a therapist. And it refers to areas of personal growth around the edges of your comfort level or what you already know or what you've experienced. And so for people to heal or develop further or to grow into their next version of themselves, maybe a better version, hopefully. It requires feeling and finding and identifying those growth edges and then moving past or through them. I'm not particularly interested in psychology as a overall, but I think as a human being in the world and as somebody who has very real human emotions, that is something that I felt in my own life, and that is always of interest to me. So a lot of this work talks about, or when I was developing it, I'm thinking a lot about a kind of internality, a sort of personal experience, and subjectivity. And so I think that coincides a lot with that kind of personal psychology terminology, because there is a level of self-analysis and introspection there. Yes, so emotional reality is at the center of this work. That's the current term I'm working with. Just meaning that I think there is a lot of importance to connect to our own feelings and subjectivity. And in my own life, I find that I'm pretty extroverted. And even if I wasn't, I think our connections to each other are so important. And that's to ourselves first and primarily, and then to family, friends, romantic partners, community. I think that is all something that is almost threatened today. I think the ideas of attachment as they pertain to romance perhaps is a common topic for discussion in my life these days. And it's something that I think about, like, why do all of us so very much want to connect to each other? And yet this is a very hard thing to do. And in all aspects, people want more community. They want to feel more grounded in the place that they live. And it's feeling harder and harder. And I have my own theories about why that is. Spoiler alert, it's the internet. But I think with this work, it's me finding a way to talk about and to express that. And so it's often coming through in a kind of hyperbolic way, but also often in a kind of jovial or joking or sarcastic manner. So sarcasm is something I use a lot, and you'll see that in smiley faces. So just kind of happy, basic, put a smile on, as a kind of overarching, like not plateau, but as a baseline. So being happy as a baseline is something that I think is expected in polite society. And I think something that you have to strive towards, but also I think there is an internal world that we all have, and it might not always look like that on the surface. And so in my work, there's different symbols that I've been bringing in, such as crying eyes and a lot of, like water droplets. And there's a lot of hearts and a lot of decoration and a lot of, just through the imagery that I'm using, I think a lot of references to femme aesthetic. And this all has to do with my own lived experience being in an emotional human container. So the presentation of my work and the way that I'm arranging it on both pedestals and then suspended, I think is a lot about problem solving and then my personal aesthetic and sensibility. So at the core of my practice, I am a maker. And this strangely is something that I've had to come to terms with. But I like to work with my hands. It's when I can get into my flow state, when I'm perhaps my happiest. And so first and foremost, I come through and I make the work. It always starts with the making. And ceramic is my primary medium and the love of my life. but I recently have been incorporating glass and mixed media works in with the ceramic work, which is happening a lot in this exhibition. And so from the starting point of my kind of like special precious objects that I make, I want to then build out a kind of backdrop or a world or an environment or even a kind of, I want to say vibe in which to examine and absorb them. And so in doing this, I come into a space with different materials. A lot of these are also ready-mades. So that's the other, I guess that's maybe the polar end of my deep interest and need to manipulate material with my hands versus my completely untroubled by buying ready-mades, which I think also have their own kind of interesting legacy and history and was produced and manufactured somewhere. So there's a hidden labor there that I'm fascinated with too. But to integrate all of these items, I am setting the stages for the ceramic work with these circular backdrops. I've been working in that way for some time. I just think it's important to consider how the piece is viewed and to set a little bit of context with them. And so that is how these different waterfalls and jungle landscapes, there's an oceanscape here as well. And that paired with the different suspended chains and elements hanging, including glass, just offer a way to enter the show and have an exploratory moment. So that's important to me, like a sense of wonder maybe. And I think there's also a good deal of tension coming into the space. For one, because having works that are glass hanging on hooks from the ceiling and ceramic chain, I think there's already like a little bit of nerve involved there. I think these are hanging in a kind of hanging garden style, so it is possible to bump into them, and that will happen for some folks. And I think that level of kind of awareness that brings you back to your body and makes you have to have a kind of spatial awareness around you, makes you move through the show differently. And so when I'm laying it out, I take that into consideration. I'm very intuitive when I'm designing an exhibition. So I know the elements that I have, I know the feeling that I want, that I have and that I would like to convey or maybe invite. And so I'll arrange things according to that. When creating this work, I think less about the objects as figures themselves, though I know there is a kind of immediate recognition with these being shrouded figures. There's one in particular that has this removable wand that is a set of eyes with little dangling hearts and teardrops on it. And I think that one in particular, walking by, I was delighted to find that it looks like a shrouded figure. And I used to make figurative work. Years and years ago, my start in ceramics was making full figures at about half size, like tabletop or freestanding, full female figurative sculptures. And then something happened along my education in grad school, I think, where I decided that I was less interested in looking at the figure, at the female body, and rather capturing the kind of emotion or experience without having that represented in a figure itself. And so I think what I like about this show, and something, that I discovered in the making of this exhibition, is that there is still that sense of kind of association and that kind of relationship with the objects. With the work pulled apart, there are human hands, and I think that's a pretty good indicator, or that's a kind of an evidence of my previous life making full figurative ceramic sculptures. And so I think hands can be one of the most emotive parts of our bodies. They say if you look at somebody's hands, you can tell a lot what they're thinking. If people are nervous, they'll do certain things with their hands. Scared or angry, you might clench a fist subconsciously. And so I think having the hands in this work, for one, lets me exercise my own hands. I like making these little fidgety things, even though it can be fussy. But I think there's also a way to innately capture that figurative experience. So I've had a lifelong fascination with Asian grocery stores. This started when I was very little. My mom is from Vietnam. She was a refugee during the Vietnam War. And I was raised without any connection to Vietnamese culture. I barely know any of the Vietnamese side of my family, though many of them made it over. I don't have language, religion, culture, but I do have food. And a lot of the way that I interacted with that was my mom's cooking and restaurants. But also a lot of my formative memories and kind of areas where I was able to understand and form my sense of identity happened in the grocery store, happened in Asian grocery stores. And so in the US, depending on where you live, it's often, there are more or less specific grocery stores that might serve certain like countries, or ethnicities. So there's, there are Korean stores, there's Chinese, there's Japanese, but oftentimes, the one I went to was kind of just serving the general Asian American diaspora. And so in those spaces, I'm still very happy, still feel very at home. It's a place of discovery and relaxation for me. And then also I love candy. And there's always been a very like deep trigger in my mind, in a good trigger. Like there's a switch that flips when I go to the candy section of an Asian grocery store. A true lifelong fascination with the flavors, the packaging, the imagery that is used, the colors. And I borrow a lot of that and put it directly into my work. So in this exhibition, there are works. So the strawberry is a personal symbol that I've adopted. I use this over and over again in different ways. And that for me references, just on its face, strawberry pocky, which was one of my favorite childhood confections and that I still love. But then I like the strawberry as like a beautiful, cute, I think it's a cute fruit. And then it also is coded as feminine for me. So that's another one of my interests, is kind of understanding culture as it pertains to gender, how I fit into that, how, how narratives are formed, how we perform them, and how that all affects our daily lives. And so for me, a strawberry comes into the conversation on multiple levels, the grocery store being the initial entry point. The Asian grocery store still, like if I'm having a bad day, is a surefire way to have a good time and turn it into a more exploratory experience. I think that also has some follow through with how I'm setting up and how I'm thinking about the display of works. Like the presentation in Growth Edge has that same sense of, there aren't aisles here, but I think there's kind of walking through and having something catch your eye over here and having something over there. There are light bulbs hanging from the ceiling, and there's, I think, a decent amount of kind of a kitsch element, but everything here is made to be sort of pleasing and sort of pretty. Nothing is so challenging here, much in the way that when you're going and going into a commercial space, quite often the goal is to kind of appease or to comfort or to entice. And I've always been interested about those subconscious tools used by marketing, and how they speak to us. They speak to our lizard brain. And it's a goal to take those same tools, subvert them, and then to use them maybe for good, I don't know, but to use them nonetheless. That's maybe the primary objective. And so I think by using like different shining surfaces, sometimes there's glitter nail polish spray painted onto multiple works in this exhibition. There are bows and strawberries and things to kind of look at and absorb. And there are certain mirrored surfaces that also, when you let somebody see themselves, they feel more comfortable with it. And I know for dressing windows for like fashion and for clothing sales, it's a good idea to put some mirrors at the front, because that puts them back into the environment where they're thinking of themselves with the item, and there's that kind of association, and they're more likely to enter the store if you let them see themselves walking by. And so I like that kind of awareness and that kind of interaction. And I think that helps bring viewers into the work if they literally see themselves reflected in it. Throughout the exhibition, there are different types of chains. Most of them are stained porcelain chains. So I used a mason stain, and they're unglazed. So it's they've been stained blue and pink, and they snake throughout the space. There are also, there are chains from a few different bodies of work in here. The oldest of which I think date back to like 2013. But chains are something that I've been making for quite a while, but only I'm really now feeling like I'm coming into my own understanding of my interest level with them. I think suspending work is a nice way to kind of elevate the pieces. You can move all the way around them. I think there's also a sense of danger and precarity that I'm interested in. But it's really just, it's also just fun. I like the way it uses the space, like the kind of negative space in the room, and can really create a kind of installation environment that's dynamic to move through beyond, sculpture on a pedestal or even sculpture on the ground or wall works. I like using the kind of open space and being able to draw the eye up and then back down. And so I can draw lines through the space with the shape and the drape of the different sections of chain. Yes, so a lot of the ready-mades, which include backdrops and the novelty light bulbs in this exhibition, and the lighting fixtures, those I'm just finding online. And so for years, I've also been interested in waterfalls, and I've been expressing that interest through these waterfall backdrops. For me, waterfalls speak to a kind of lush, imagined jungle. I think about this a lot in terms of understanding my mom's country, which is Vietnam, which I've been to twice, but only as a visitor, though it was lovely. And so I like the idea of finding these images that exist of this place. And then as I started to dig around for these different backdrops, I find that they're highly edited. Sometimes it's bizarrely edited, and that makes me even more intrigued. Because somebody designed this and they're made to be sold, and yet people are choosing the most over the top kind of artificial looking elements. Some of them include cranes, which I don't think they live in that environment, and set into them giant pink blooming lotuses, swaths of green mowed grass in the foreground. And I love that. That's all just getting to this really interesting space where I think the idea of commercialism kind of takes on its own life and takes on its own aesthetic. It's the copy of the copy of the copy, all made to please you. And it doesn't look anything like a natural image or like an actual photograph of this space. And yet I find it incredibly appealing. And let's see. Oh, and with the novelty light bulbs, I think those are just beautiful and fun. And yeah, I'm completely untroubled by participating in the consumer market in this way. I think that I'm selecting objects that are speaking to the ideas that I want to capture and that are intriguing to me for some of the reasons I'd mentioned before, which are that they're, I think, often kind of made very decorative or very pretty or sometimes over-designed. And those aesthetics are all fascinating to me. A lot about that connects with my overall aesthetic of the work, I think, too. So I'm very interested in decoration and adornment, polishing things up and making them pretty and dressing them up. I think this again connects to a lot of my upbringing and the cultural teachings that I've received about femininity and the requirements of that. And so I internalized a lot of that and I live that. And I'm also don't feel that I'm suffering from that per se, but I do want to be aware of that. And actually there is some suffering that comes with it. Come on, like it's hard. It's hard to feel like you need to look something to be a certain way to move through the world in acceptance. But I express that a lot on specific works and just subconsciously even. I go through wanting to over decorate them. I want to put charms on them. I want to put earrings and beautiful elements on them. I think a lot of that is coming from a very feminine aesthetic. So I am not trying to pare these things down. I'm aware that when I do that, I am losing at least half my audience because there's a reaction to femininity. There's especially a reaction to, I think, a lot of this I want to say teenage femininity too, that I'm really interested in, like glitter and butterfly clips. I like my work to be pink or baby blue. And so I think that coming into that space is something very conscious for me. And I'm using those elements in a way to communicate these ideas, but also to have a real experience myself. I'm feeling more and more like I want to have a cathartic experience with my work. And that if I can't find my own personal stake in it, if I'm not taking any level of risk or showing a certain level of honesty with that work, that I'm not connected to it. And kind of what's the point, Yeah, I think that it's a hodgepodge, I think we try to express our identity oftentimes through clothing that we buy somewhere. I think that we show others and often ourselves who we are through the things that we collect and the things that we buy, also the things that we make. And so I think that this exhibition and a lot of my work is kind of finding that balance. When walking into the space, I hope that viewers would feel a sense of wonder and a sense of discovery, and also a curiosity that is sparked. My work is largely, it's both object-based and installation-based. And so when I came into the space, I had a pretty good idea of what I'd wanted, but none of the details. And so as I put the exhibition together, it was done piece by piece, kind of back and forth sometimes, with certain anchor points, certain experimental elements, I think all of which ended up staying in and that I'm very pleased with. But it all has to do with that initial experience of exploration. And then hopefully finding something kind of interesting in that mix too, I would hope. So there are items hidden, there are little charms and kind of, like jewel-like items. There's a lot of different textures, different surfaces. There's transparent glass, sprayed surfaces with nail polish or ceramic glaze. And so I think that having a sense of play as you come into the exhibition as a viewer is something that I hope would happen.